Welcome to the Money GPS. Today, this is the Q&A session that we've all been waiting for. I'll get into it right away, just letting you know that I haven't read every one of these questions yet, so I just sort of skimmed over them and I'll answer them as I go through. I'm not going to get into too much detail for each individual question because, of course, that would take too much time. Some of these questions may really take a whole video to explain, but you'll get the point, you'll get a little tidbit, and perhaps if there's more interest in it, I can do a whole video about that in the near future. So let's get into this right away. I wanted to state that if it goes too long, I'll just abruptly cut the video off and have a part 2 or part 3 of this. So let's try to get through it quickly. Right here, starting at the very top, as I just scroll through, how bad will it get? Well, that depends on the area that you live in. What's important to note is that an economy is generally built by the middle class. If this region or the city that you live in has a very small middle class to begin with, and there's already a great divide, well, then you may face troubles sooner. Ultimately, if you're in the general major city, let's say around the world, these major cities will all be suffering. There will be riots. There will be a lot of shortages of basic essentials. Why? That's just what happens in every natural disaster. So surely this will occur. So let me move on to this. If you could choose only 3 skills to have for the post-collapse, what will they be and why? Well, just off the top of my head, things that I believe are crucial to have is some simple skills for gardening, perhaps be able to use drip irrigation. You want your water catch system to flow into that. You would probably want to be able to handle all of the little fixing that would need to be done with your solar panels. So I'm talking about basic fixing, not necessarily to become a handyman, but just to be able to hold your own. That's what I believe would be important. How do we get the government to let us opt out of Social Security? Well, a lot of people talk about opting out a lot of the government programs. Now, a lot of this, people will say, you don't have to pay your income taxes. Some get away with that, but also some do not. What I do believe is that as much as I hate most government programs, in fact, I'm just trying to think off the top of my head, I'm not aware of one that I actually really like. But essentially, what we have to do is do what needs to be done and sort of circumvent what we can get around. Do we need to pay for the electricity that they continuously increase? No. Have your own solar panels. Do we want this genetically modified food garbage? No. Grow your own. And you see where I'm going with that. Let's move on to here. Define socialism, capitalism, communism, and economics. Display how each white is good or bad. Okay, so socialism and communism, to me, it's all the same thing. It's totalitarianism. It's collectivism. Capitalism, true capitalism doesn't really exist. We have crony capitalism. That's basically let's get our buddies and have them all gather together and let's take over this system. The true capitalism, it's not really existent from what I see. And economics is basically the study of the economy and the economic factors. Let's move on to here. Have you worked in the finance industry? And if so, for how long? All I'm going to say for this is that, number 1, never take my advice, because I see where you're heading with that. Basically to determine if I'm credible. Do I have any credentials? I've been working in the finance industry for, well, it's been almost a decade, but that doesn't matter. Let's just make the assumption that I have absolutely no experience in the financial industry. Don't take anything that I say as reality. Look at the sources and do your own research. I'm just here to point the finger at things. Never trust me. Never trust anybody else you see, whether it's on YouTube or in a book or anything. You have to double, triple, quadruple check everything. Will we revert back to a third world country due to the lower class having higher birth rates? I'm not really sure it will be considered a third world country, and I believe you're talking about the US or any of the major Western countries. It may, devolve quite a bit, but I'm not sure they'll consider it necessarily a third world country. All of the infrastructure is there. They may not be able to necessarily work on it, but I do believe to some degree it will remain intact. I mean, if you look at the Great Depression, it was a very serious scenario that went on for decades, in reality, the stock market, but it ultimately came back up. What will the likely effect of the euro and British pound if the UK leaves the euro, and with the uncertainty of the currencies, which is used by a lot of people, do you think this will be bullish for gold? I really don't think the UK is going to leave the euro or the EU at all. I do believe that the EU will probably expand, if anything, although a lot of people don't see it that way. I believe that the creation of the EU was for a reason. It was for control. And that's why they want this. That's why they want this entire system. But if that were to occur, yes, it would cause some fluctuations in the currencies, the forex markets. You definitely will see that. And in reality, yes, it's bullish for gold. I agree with that. Anytime there's currency weakness, you'll see gold looking stronger, but ultimately the price of gold seems to be within a trading range right now because it's manipulated, and that's what they're doing. They're trying to force it within this range. Physical precious metals, however, are in high demand, but nobody cares about that because it's all about futures markets anyway. All right, let's say if you're in charge of the country's finance, how is your country going to pay off its debt owed to foreign countries like China and Japan? What are your country's assets you would sell to pay off the debt? Well, first of all, I would close up as many of the military bases, close up anything to do with war basically gets shut down, and all of the troops get brought home to protect our own borders. I would also basically stop all foreign aid, or most foreign aid, I should say. We don't need that. And at times like these, perhaps at a different time, there would be more appropriate. But that's just the way I am. Perhaps it's considered to be selfish. I'm not a politician anyway, so what do I know? But essentially, you have to fix the problems. You have to plug the holes, and these are ways that you can use the money that's being used elsewhere, overseas, and use it to your own country. That's just the way I see it. When will the king dollar get dethroned? It's going to happen. Ultimately, it's going to happen over a period of time. I do believe that a new currency system will be initiated, but it's not going to happen overnight necessarily. We're going to see a slow decline, a slow erosion that is occurring, and it's been going on for quite some time, but I do believe that will continue to happen. It's a long period of time. Remember that in Britain that didn't happen overnight. It's a thing that's been also changing as the years go on. So currency status or the reserve currency status don't necessarily change overnight. I do believe something like the IMF's SDR would most likely be the next type of system. Does that mean you're going to use an SDR when you go to the store? No, absolutely not. But behind the scenes, they'll be the ones taking over. I listened to another fellow, Jim Willey. He seems to think there would be a move to gold-backed currency again, as well as monetary reset when the smoke clears, meaning all countries would be evaluated on their national resources. And what he's suggesting is that will we go back to a gold-backed currency? I don't believe that will ever happen. Personally, I think it might be a good thing. It's not necessarily going to fix all the problems, but having something backing the currency system would be great. However, you have a bunch of bankers all in control. They're not going to let go of that control. I do believe that the next stage of the system will be worse than what we're in today. Call me a pessimist. That's just the way I see it. They've been in control for perhaps thousands of years. I'm not sure exactly when you want to, calculate that or quantify that, but I don't see them just losing control all of a sudden. I really don't. I think it's going to get worse. But if you have your own source of, let's call it, being self-sufficient, you're not going to be part of their system so much. Sure, to some degree, I mean, you're living in this world, they control it, but you can really, put a big distance, a big gap in between you and them. Also, what do you think of the various wars in the Middle East will go nuclear? To be honest, I don't think it's going to go nuclear. If it does, it's going to end very quickly. No need to worry there. You are given free rein to reset the global financial system to make it work properly. What would you do? Right away, there is no such thing as derivatives. Derivatives would only exist in a laboratory. That's where it can exist. On paper, that's where it can exist, not playing with our own finances. I would also say that we have to get rid of fractional reserve banking. Zero fractional reserve banking. Those are the two things that I would implement right away. What's the all-in cost to mine an ounce of silver? Actually, the way that I've read this is basically dependent on where it's mined. And what's interesting about silver is that often it's mined as a byproduct of other metals. So it depends on exactly who's mining, where they're mining, how difficult it is to get it out of the ground. When a bank gets fined, where does the fine go? Is it a bank? Well, it depends on who's fining it. I'm not really sure what's happening. For example, Wells Fargo, Wachovia was fined, if I'm not mistaken, it was a few $1 million anyway when they laundered $373 or was it $383 billion. Ultimately, that money could go to wherever they deem it necessary. Ultimately, it's not going to go back into the hands of people. That doesn't work like that if that's what you're suggesting. I'm concerned what will life be like after this coming collapse. I don't know what to expect. People on the internet tell us that we need guns and water, etc. What's your opinion? Canada's specific answer would be the best. After the collapse, and we're talking about a slow erosion, my definition of a collapse is a slow erosion. What we will see is that food becomes very, very expensive for at least a short period of time. The food will be empty off the store shelves. I do agree with that. There is a lot of confusion with exactly how bad things will get. If you just take the Great Depression, for example, that infrastructure that was there before, it still existed afterwards, right? It's just a period of significant hardship. So you have to remember that it's not just going to be, okay, there's a collapse tomorrow and all of a sudden the buildings start falling down. It doesn't work like that. You just have mass unemployment, poverty, there's going to be riots, there's going to be all sorts of things occurring. But ultimately, that, things do get, let's not call it the norm, but things do get back out there. I don't necessarily see it being a Mad Max type scenario. I'm not suggesting it can't get there, because it absolutely can. There are going to be riots. There are going to be all sorts of things happening that are not good, and it's going to extend for a long period of time. But I just don't believe that necessarily it's going to go to sort of an apocalyptic type scenario with nuclear bombs, eradicating cities and things. It can happen. I don't see that as the more likely option. That's what I would say. They say that the economy is getting stronger. That must be a joke. After Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, AIG, Lehman Brothers, QE1 and 2 and 3 tapered and then rise in interest rates, how is the Fed still floating this economy? Is there some hidden way that they're buying the debt? Well, just look at their fact that they printed $16 trillion and they took that money, gave it out to foreign institutions all around the world. Look at their balance sheet. That $16 trillion is nowhere to be found. So the amount of money they have printed, we literally do not know. We have no idea. So what their activities are on a day-to-day basis, we have no idea. We don't know what the Fed is doing. The economy isn't necessarily being floated at all. I would actually suggest that it's doing terribly. The statistics that they show us on TV are just, it's fiction. It might keep people distracted, but really it's not being floated, if you see what I'm saying with that. I would like to know if there's any data on what happens to the price of a physical asset such as property during a devaluation. I'm not sure exactly what you're referring to here, but what I was just suggesting that during that devaluation, if this is a deflation, you're going to see that prices decline, but there's a ripple effect that occurs. Because if the price of everyone's home in Canada, for example, if the price of everyone's home starts to decline, we're going to have a situation where people are hurt because they put so much of their money or their debt into these assets. When they come down, they're going to be hurt very badly. A lot of people pull out a lot of their equity because they've seen it grow and use that to purchase other liabilities. Does Canada need a Glass-Steagall law? Yes, every country does. Can Canada Bank Canadian banks invest in the Canadian population's deposits and risky investments like derivatives. Actually, all of the Canadian banks have derivatives, trillions of dollars worth. I think I might have done a video about that in the past. If I'm not mistaken, I have, and I believe that the largest one was Royal Bank of Scotland. If I'm not mistaken, RBC maybe. I'm a little rusty on that. I think it might have been one of those banks anyway. One of the top two Canadian banks had somewhere in the range of 7 to 8 trillion in derivatives. So we're talking more than the GDP of all of Canada. It's a joke. Where do the missing socks go? I don't know. Check your top drawer.